We have lots of questions from people um, who sent in questions when they registered, which is great. For those of you at home, feel free to pop questions in the chat as we go, and we'll be happy to talk about them. And we'll get started. We'll talk a little bit about the poetry submission process and then also on the editor side of things. I think a lot of people want to know about how editors approach submissions. So, first, what's the fastest and easiest way to get published?
Well, the fastest and easiest way to get published would be to publish your own stuff yourself. I think everybody who's here right now is familiar with Substack in some capacity. And I think a platform like Substack or just social media in general, a lot of people post their poems on Twitter or Instagram. And I think that is the fastest and easiest way to get published. Just publish yourself.
Do you think it's better to get them in a journal first and then republish them on your Substack or social media? I know there are some people that publish exclusively on social media, and others that it's really important to them to get into lit mags. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Of course, it really depends on your goal. I think the idea of publishing in a journal stems from the fact that um, you are building a portfolio of publications, which is necessary for getting a tenure track job, or once you have that tenure track, to get the tenure or just to get promotions within the academic space. But since now that has become less and less likely because it's so few jobs, so many people who want the jobs. It That meaning or that reason for people wanting to publish in journals is has gotten lost along the way. People now want to find readers through journals because journals have a following that um, is pretty faithful, or so I'd like to think.
Yeah.
So people want to get their readership, so to speak, through publishing in journals. But if truly you want to find readership, I know so many poets on Instagram who have a lot more readership than a lot of the magazines that are well reputed. Um, even even their readership cannot match the readership of those Instagram poets. It's more faithful, it's more devoted, it's larger in number, it's more qualitative in some sense. Um, so it truly depends on your goal. If you're able to build that leadership, if you are that magnetic, and you have that kind of output where you write a lot, self-publishing might really be worth a shot.
Mhm.
Is how I think of it. Really.
Sure. Um, what about tailoring your submissions to different literary journals? Let's say you're somebody who writes a lot and you have a lot of poems. If you send the wrong poems to the wrong journals where it's not a good fit, that's a lot of work not to get published. So how do you know which pieces to send where?
That's a good question too, especially for people who submit a lot. The way I have always submitted, I haven't submitted in a long time now, but when I used to, I would send out work to the places where my favorite writers would publish. I would usually pick a book that I really like, and I will go to the acknowledgments section of that book and I will see which poems were published where. And if I resonated with any of the poems, I'll send out work there. And then, of course, there are magazines that are, say, dream magazines where you want to submit your best stuff. So it's kind of shooting in the dark. But if you do have a sense of the voice of the magazine or what they like, you can usually make better decisions. Say if I have some poems about God that I love, and some of my best prayer poems or something, and I know that Image magazine likes to publish stuff that is around faith, I will send them those poems. And whereas if I know a a certain magazine loves love poems, and I will send them my love poems and not vice versa, just to have better chances, I guess.
Sure. There's a question in the chat. What if your goal is to get a book deal with a major publisher? How does that change your submission strategy?
It is a good idea to build your portfolio or your CV, so to speak, by publishing in journals that are well known. If you get published in the American Poetry Review, for instance, you probably have a better shot of an agent noticing you, or when you have a book that you send out as a manuscript to, say, contests or just open calls for, say, Copper Canyon. I'm not sure if they do open calls anymore, but as an example, if you have American Poetry Review, Agni, the Paris Review, or whatever, as your acknowledge in your under your acknowledgement section, it does, I imagine, create some sort of an effect, a positive effect that, okay, this is a person who's been doing this for a long time. This is a person who's been vetted by editors of prestigious magazines. Um, so it might be worth my time looking into that manuscript.
What percentage of your poems would you recommend getting previously published in journals before submitting to a book contest or an open reading period?
That's an interesting question, an interesting way of looking at it. I would say 100%. But to achieve that 100%, people would end up, I imagine some writers would end up submitting poems to subpar magazines or magazines that not many people read or have heard of, which is sometimes can be a good, noble idea because, I mean, this is a poetry world and it's very small anyway. Even the even the most famous magazines are being read have a very small readership in comparison to the world at large, I guess, or in comparison to how many people listen to, I don't know, a Kendrick Lamar music album. So your goal should be clear to you. If you think you can get a book deal, if you have a solid book, you don't necessarily need a single published poem before you send out a book for a contest. If you think your book is good and doesn't really demand, in fact, a lot of contests I think discourage you from having an acknowledgement section. So it's not necessary in any way, but you might get the most out of your book or your manuscript if you do send out work, in the sense that people will already be aware of you as a writer, as poems from from that book. They will be familiar with your voice. They will be, and also you'll get some, dopamine that you got published in so and so magazine. You might even make 50, $100 along the way. So there's nothing to lose there, really.
Yeah.
So 100% would be my answer, but for somebody it might be zero, and I can totally understand that.
I want to get into submission strategy for a little bit. There's some questions in the chat that I wanted to ask first. Would you suggest hello poetry or only poems for poems about current political issues?
I wish I knew what Hello Poetry is, but I imagine that's a magazine.
I'm not familiar.
Um, we do, as I can speak for only poems for sure. We do publish political poems pretty much all the time. Uh, I know that there are many magazines who do the same. So much poetry that is written is political poetry. In fact, all poetry can be read through through the lens of sociopolitical. As us being sociopolitical beings, everything can be read through that lens. So, yes.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, for only poems, there's the Poet's Howl category, which is
Right.
specific to current events, but then the poems that get accepted for Poet of the Week or Poem of the Month,
Right.
those can also be political.
Right. Of course. Our poet of the week right now is Christian Butterfield, who is a magnificent autistic poet. And the fact that he writes so much about his autism becomes political in and of itself because of the way with which he approaches that topic. So I think most poets who are aware of the fact that we live in a society and there's no other way to live will eventually be political in one way or another.
Do you think that, there's an increase in political poetry lately, or do you think that poetry has always inherently been political and and that's what's always been accepted by journals?
I would imagine that it's been more so now because of only because of the way the world works, in the sense that we have so much access to so much that happens around the world through social media and our phones. We are always aware of whatever is happening pretty much everywhere, anywhere, at all times. So our brains are flooded with all sorts of information, most of which is political in nature. So I imagine it is more so now than ever before, and it'll likely only increase.
Um, there's a question in the chat from Abe.
Sorry, I don't want to, I don't, just to clarify, poetry has also always been political or and not. So there's, yeah, but I imagine it's people see more stuff happening and people want to express themselves.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, it's true, and poetry has certainly always been, about whatever it is that weighs heavily on us. I think that there's a lot more variety of outlets, um, of different ways that you can put political poetry out there, and so maybe people are seeing it more, but it's always been, around. So, someone is wondering Abe is wondering, "I'm posting my work, a sci-fi fantasy allegory, chapter by chapter on Substack. Am I shooting myself in the foot for later publishing deals?"
I like that way of asking the question. And I would think no. A lot of people who have recently in the last few years have gotten book deals, have been authors who've published their own work on platforms like Substack or Wattpad and have gone on to get $500,000 book deals. So no, you're not shooting yourself in the foot, especially because you mentioned it's a novel and not short stories, which short stories people publish in magazines, and some editors demand that they not be published before. So if it were short stories, maybe you'd have some trouble republishing or publishing them in journals if you've already published them by yourself. But for a novel, it might you might actually end up finding an audience, and if that audience is substantial enough for a publisher to feel that you might make them money, then it's a win-win for you.
Yeah. There's a follow-up question on this. Also, is it okay to market your serial series on social media as essentially a real-time draft with the end goal of having a finished manuscript?
Some people have done that quite
Mhm.
successfully. I would never be able to do something to that effect because of how much I edit and rewrite and how critical I am of my own work. But if you have that kind of exuberance and self-assurance, uh, go for it. I am all for people putting their work out, especially if you write a lot and if you do it consistently, if you have that kind of privilege and that talent and that skill to do it, um, the more the better.
And I guess if you are somebody who constantly edits, when you go to publish the full manuscript, you can still rewrite all those chapters, right? Even if you had already put them out there.
Absolutely. You'll most likely end up rewriting it. If not by your own accord, your editor would demand some changes for sure. So if they're any good,
Annabelle is wondering, how much should someone self-edit before sending it to a pro?
mm, there is there is no how much to it. Some people can hit it off the park in the first go. For somebody like me, it takes a couple of years to write a decent poem. So there really is no answer to that. You are the judge.
Yeah. Um, For teenage poets, do you think their age hurts their chances of publication? I know there's some publications specific for young writers, but what about general pubs?
It's very interesting. I've never been asked that question before, so that's kind of cool. I do sometimes see when I'm reading for our own magazine some younger poets, and personally, I am actually interested in younger people and how they are thinking, because most of the poems we get are not from teenagers. So it's kind of having it's like they stand out in our submission pool for sure. So I'm always interested in how talented young people are. We have published somebody who's in a high in high school, perhaps even right now. They send us a lot of poems still, even though we have published them before. I think they really like the magazine, and I'm very grateful. Um, I wish I knew if how other editors think of this, but I imagine the concerns that teenagers often might have might be considered punitive, as transparent as I can be, and might hurt their case. But I personally do not operate from that perspective.
Um, what about for people who want to break into the publishing, the editorial side of literary publishing? What advice would you have for someone who wants to break in?
Um, if you like a magazine or a publication house, volunteer your hours. Uh, I know for a fact that most people do not have that privilege. But if you take out a little bit of time here and there, and if you truly want to devote yourself to this, all of most of this industry, at least the literary side of things, it's a labor of love. Svetlana was for our magazine a reader 2 years ago, and she became a reviews editor. Then she is now a managing editor. She was an associate editor for a while. These terms really don't mean much because we all do everything pretty much. So we are all managing editors and all associate editors and editors in chief and creative directors. So, but I'm just giving an example of how somebody, and now Sutlana is also managing things for Chill Subs, and
Mhm.
she's an event manager there. So if you truly want to break into the industry, I'd be like Svetlana, I guess. Uh, or you're probably the right person to answer that question.
Well, I think the nice thing about it, it's about trying to break into an industry where a lot of positions are unpaid is there's potentially infinite positions, right? If you start volunteering for a journal and they really like, for example, the comments that you leave on submissions, they might just add you on as an editor or associate editor, because even though they already have one, there are journals that have five poetry editors, um, or lots of journals want to expand to add a different category, and you might be the perfect person for that. What about taking the leap from a volunteer job to a paid editorial position? Do you have any insight on that?
I think positions open, but they're so well sought after that the chances are very, very low. If yeah, you're better off starting your own magazine, is what I'd say because of my own experience. Not that I ever wanted to be an editor at another magazine or anything. It just happened.
So there's a question from someone who's the editor in chief of a magazine. It's print and online, and she would
Wow.
love your advice on how you've managed your team at Only Poems and grown so popular while staying efficient.
Um, Thank you. We've been lucky to have people like Svetlana and a few others who have volunteered very kindly their time and have been very generous with their skills and mostly their time. Really, this this whole enterprise takes an immense amount of time and immense amount of work, and sometimes all I feel is that all we do is work pretty much all day, 7 days a week. We don't take any off days of any sort. So if you're kind of willing to ruin yourself or your life like that in that manner, then you don't even need to ask that question.
Yeah, I think you really have to love the mission behind literature, because it's one of those things that just really consumes
Yeah.
you. Yeah. Um, there's another question about shape poems or concrete poems. Can they help a poet to stand out in a good way, or do most editors want to throw them in the trash? Are they annoying to format, or do you just
Uh,
think it's
That's
worth it?
interesting. We've never had a formatting issue so far. Thank God for that. We would probably put embed PDFs if it gets too complicated. But I know that there are magazines mm, that would, or presses that have trouble setting up a poem if it's too wonky. But that's a later question. The question that comes before is about concrete poetry itself. I am personally not a fan. So, and I know many people who are not. So I think when you do some experiment like that, you have to be extra good. You have to have a reason for why you want a poem to look a certain way, or why you're putting it in the shape of a circle or a bird or whatever you're doing. But if it's just for the sake of it, um, it's fun for a second. But if it has no deeper value, then one can tell if one has read a little bit. I think it's easy to tell if the form is following some kind of purpose or not, or serving some kind of purpose.
What is it about shape poetry? Is it too on the nose? Is it too like
I'm
just
sure there are people who can do it well. I'm
yeah?
sure they exist. I'm yet to meet them, is all. But I'm sure that they exist.
I think one thing I've heard you talk about is that a poem is not just words, it is a work of art in itself in the way that it appears on the page, right? Negative space is important. Um, do you want to speak a little bit about that compared to shape poetry?
Right. Uh, Good questions, Udlana. I really like how, because a poem is an object first. You see it, you consume it at once on how it looks on the paper. I mean, I love holding a book. The way a book is an object, right? The book is an object first before you open it and you see that there are words in it, and the words make sentences, and the sentences make meaning, and the meaning makes a story. Similarly, a poem has all of those elements. Of course, they have images, metaphors, etc., etc. But first and foremost, it is a thing to look at. And I think many people actually don't care about that. Many people can read books which are not justified, in which the paragraphs are not justified, or the font is terrible, or it's too big, or there are people, and I'm again surprised by those people. I'm like, why isn't it bothering you? Because it bothers me a great deal if the line spacing is incorrect, or, and by incorrect I mean just doesn't look right, and it's very, very intuitive. So I consume, I want a poem to look beautiful, and I cannot explain what that beauty is. I cannot define it. I just know it when it is beautiful, and I also know it when it's not. And I think that just happens after you read a lot. I I read a shit ton. I've
Yeah.
read 3 dozen books of poetry in the last week, if not more. I'm just like culling out books, and I'm preparing a pack of books for AWP to give away to people and to maybe collect some money. So I'm just seeing that I just want to give away like good books. I don't want to give, I don't know, a really terrible book to somebody. So yeah, I've been just reading a lot because
That makes me wonder. I think there's a lot of conversations about form right now. People experiment with form. There's experimental spacing. How do you know what form a poem wants to take? Because sometimes the experimental spacing feels a little arbitrary, right? So how do you make it meaningful?
that is also good. And I've always thought about this because I experiment with form myself quite a bit, in the sense that either I know that a poem is going to be a prose poem, or it's going to be not a prose poem. And the only way I'm able to tell is by putting it as a prose poem, as a prose block, and also not, and seeing which one speaks to me better. So I experiment a lot with couplets or just tercets sometimes, but usually one single stanza of free verse poems, or put them in a prose block. And usually whatever speaks to me and what feels right, what feels strange and less expected sometimes is seems to be the way to go.
Yeah. Um, what advice do you have for people who publish formal poetry or rhyming poetry?
publish it in a way that it becomes accessible to people who are older and also people who are young, like really young, as in children. Because Anna, whenever I write, I've been writing poems that rhyme recently, which is too great to. I'm surprised by those myself. But when I read them at night just to see how they sound, and I'm putting Anna to bed or something, and she's listening. Anna's my daughter. Not everybody knows that. I'm speaking to you because you know. Um, she she is thrilled by rhyme. She's like viscerally thrilled. Her reaction is physical. She's like, and she goes around the house all day making songs. And how do you make songs by rhyming? Is at least how she thinks of it. Um, and there is something really pleasant about rhyme and our need for structure, that kind of structure. But I think people our age, my age, Svetlana's age, even my students' age or who are 18 or 19, I think we as a culture have moved away from rhyme or seeing rhyme as serious poetry. And the the push that you have to make against that is far too strong um, for you to justify writing in rhyme. So my suggestion is write it for people, or at least make it accessible to people who would enjoy it, which is people who are either children or older people. It is how I imagine it is. It could be very wrong.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. I think um, in music, we sort of come to expect rhyme.
I was just gonna say, or put it to music. That would be That'd be like m- poetry has nothing on music. I mean, music is such a higher form of art. No other form of art has anything on music. So if you have the kind of skill, or if you can put your poems that rhyme to music, uh, y- you're one in life. Yeah.
Yeah, and but still, the way that it's done well is by subverting expectation, right?
Yes.
Uh,
Correct.
so there are a couple other questions in the chat. I want to come back to them. Shannon had a good one in here, so if you just let me scroll. Um, it was about paid feedback. When journals offer paid feedback, are they being honest with their feedback, or is it buffered for ego preservation?
That's a good way to put that as well. Um, who knows? I know for a fact that we do a pretty good job of it. Um, but I don't know. I believe in the goodness of people. I think most people operate out of goodness. But I also know that so much shit happens in the world that I wouldn't be surprised if there are people who are grifters or people who are cheating people in various ways. So again, I can speak for ourselves. I know Sutlana does most of our feedbacks, and I know how good a job she does and how authentic and real she is. I know Shannon does a bunch. I know I do a bunch. So and they are time consuming and again a labor of love. Uh, they do get us some little money that help us run the magazine, but they are largely nobody wants to spend an hour reading through 10 pages of poems and writing about them for $25. We do it because we also love doing it. We believe in words, right, Sudhana? Do
Yeah.
you, or are you
But
fooling
one
us?
one of the things I was thinking about this question, it sounds like, can we trust the compliments that are in the feedback, or are they just being kind, right? And I think most editors would be doing a disservice to people by writing compliments that aren't real, right? I don't think that most people who write feedback would do that if they didn't mean it. Uh,
Right. No, you interpreted that question a lot better than I did. Yes, I think you are correct in assuming that people might be thinking that the praise is not is false, but I don't think that it would be pretty hard. I think you can tell if it's false. I think a writer could tell if it's false.
Yeah, I think there's really nothing in it for the editors to give encouraging feedback that isn't real. So
Right.
you should
Yeah.
so if you get it, you should trust that that's
Yeah,
sincere.
that is one thing I say, that as an editor, if there's one thing I've learned, it is that take your special rejections seriously. We get, I don't know, 1,500, 2,000 submissions a month, and we have neither time nor space to send a special rejection to people we don't mean to send them to, you know?
Yeah. Let's see. There's a couple questions in the chat.
There are like over 200 people here. Am I that arresting?
Oh, yes, absolutely. And also, I think um, we Shannon's been doing a really good job of sending out reminders the day of, and that's been
Oh,
really helpful. So I'm super grateful for
right.
people that come. But yes, I think that the last AMA you did and this one, getting into like the deeper questions about submissions are so helpful for people. Um, so should you keep all your old poems and drafts? Do you ever delete any of your work?
I know that Leonard Cohen used to save everything he ever did, and he would um, very pathologically organize it all and send it to the people who would archive it for him, because he always knew that he was going to be so famous, and then there'll be people like myself who would go to those archives and spend hours, countless hours with with that work. And the kind of communion I feel when I touch those papers in the Leonard Cohen archives in Toronto, in that rare book library, when I touch those papers that he must have once touched and put in the typewriter and typed on and made pencil marks on, that this is bad or this is good, uh, it is is something that makes life for me worth living and beautiful, and basically all good things that I experience is, yes. I mean, why not? If you think that, what is the harm? What is Why do you want to delete it? I mean, if you think that you want to declutter your laptops or your home, that's good too. You can throw it all. You can put it in a free library. Maybe somebody will take it and it'll change their lives. You can even just, like, I don't know, shred it. It 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 can matter a lot, and it can not matter at all. You do not decide that, is all. We do not decide these things.
I think that experience of holding Leonard Cohen's work is interesting because that's like holding on to it for other people to experience, right? But it's almost the question's almost like, should you throw away your old photographs? It's like sometimes that's the only evidence we have
Yeah,
about the past, right?
right. Yeah,
Yeah.
that is it. To have faith that there will be people who care. Uh, I mean, this video is being recorded, so I don't know. Maybe 6 years later, somebody's watching it, or 2 decades later. I doubt it, but it doesn't mean that it's not a possibility.
Well, you can look back when you're white haired and say, hey, look, I had, you know, um,
I still love Leonard Cohen that much. I could feel that.
yeah.
Yeah.
Annabelle is wondering what your thoughts are on fandom poetry, like Lullaby for a Princess. It is a song, but still super poetic. I'm not familiar
Question.
with the song, but
Me,
if you have any thoughts on fandom poetry.
me neither. But if by fandom poetry you mean um, poetry written as a fan of a TV show, or like there are fandoms for Supernatural, or Richard Sykin's Crush has many fandoms, I think, or a fandom. I don't know how this term is used. I have never felt part of a fandom, even though I worship at Leonard Cohen's altar. But I imagine if I write poems that are inspired by, say, a book that Leonard Cohen wrote, and I share it with people who also similarly love him or his work. Um, yeah, I mean, why do we make art is the question I asked my students this afternoon in class. And we make art because we want to communicate, because we want to find people who can resonate with us, who we can resonate with. We always gravitate toward people who like the same music, who like the same books, who have the same taste in art. So, and fandoms do that really well. They can be toxic and whatnot, but they do it really well.
Yeah. It's almost like, Greek mythology, right?
Yeah. Mm.
People still write poems,
Yes.
about the Greek gods and goddesses, and that's
Yes.
almost like a form of fandom.
Yeah, for sure. For sure.
Should we filter our writing to make it more comfortable for another person to digest, or ever apologize for writing what we think?
I think you already know the answer. You must not. The question feels like it knows the answer, and the answer is you must not. Why would you do that? Um, we also make art because again we want to communicate. But what do we want to communicate? We want to communicate that we're individuals and that what I feel. Uh, Thousands and thousands of pages are written trying to express ourselves. Why do we? What am I thinking? And I can never tell. I'm looking at Svetlana, and she's a great friend of mine, and I know her well, and I know her life, and I know who she cares about. I know her family, but I do not know what she's thinking in this moment. I do not know. Maybe she thinks I'm full of shit, or maybe she thinks I'm wonderful. She can be thinking anything. She can be probably thinking that has nothing to do about something that has nothing to do with this call at all. Um, it's only through writing and through art that we can truly enter in some small way the other's psyche or the other's being, the other's soul. For I don't know if I can say that.
I think that segues really well into this next question, which is, what is your take on the saying that every successful author or poet or writer has been a little bit insane?
Right. Again, I go back to Leonard Cohen. I think uh, I think it's probably a famous saying that all young poets, all they need is an ego that is very large, and an arrogance that is also very large, and just believing that you got it until you eventually do get it, I guess, or don't. But believing, just having that little bit of delusion that you're meant for this and that you're great and that you have something to say goes a long way. I know that I was pretty delusional. I wish I could actually be a little bit like that, how I was when I was younger, when I felt that I got it and I'm the best and whatnot. I haven't felt that way in a long time, but it is a pleasant feeling.
I think it's interesting to think about how you write things to give people insight into your brain as a form of connecting with people, right? They can see a little bit of themselves in you. That's how they can relate. But then the idea that every writer is a little bit insane or delusional because they think they have that something that's different from everybody else, something slightly
And
unusual.
we all do, right? All of us. What is it? What is the cliche or a paradox? We are all unique.
Right.
So it's true and it's not true.
When you read poetry, there's a great question that was emailed in. Can you describe how you read a poem? Not necessarily submissions, but how you encounter one in the world.
How I encounter a poem in the world. It's how I read the ingredients on a granola bar box, seeing what I like and finding if there's anything I'm allergic to in
Mm.
that list of ingredients. If there are things that do not speak to me or that would not feed me well. I guess that sums it up.
That's a really interesting take. What about when you write a poem? How do you start a poem? Do you think of a theme or a subject or an image? I know you write a poem over long periods of time, right? You come back and you revise it, but how does it begin?
I think usually it begins with a line for me, or a phrase that I find interesting, or something that I find inexplicable, or just cool. Sometimes, if I find that, oh, that sounds cool, let me see where I can take that line or phrase. And recently, it's also been. It never was before. It's also been about just starting with a mood. I've been writing prayers, and if I've been in a prayerful, melancholic mood, then I can just want to capture that as opposed to a theme or a motif or an image. Um, I don't know if that answers.
And then do you build out from there?
Yeah, yeah. You want to expand. That's kind of why we do what we do. We want to take something and just build a world out of it. It's like it's the way all creation works. It's a seed becomes a tree. That's just the same logic. A line, a phrase becomes a poem eventually. Sometimes a book
How do you know when a poem is done?
is done.
Mhm,
What is that? It's poems are never finished, only abandoned.
right.
That's a cliche by now, but it's so true, and that's probably why it's so famous. For me, it's especially true. I've been working on a book for 7 years, and it's not like it's on and off. It's been 7 constant years of working on that book. So it truly, I sometimes feel afraid now that I know that it will be a physical book. I sometimes feel, not that I'm preoccupied by this thought, but I do feel that once I see it in a book, I know that I would want to make changes to that poem. And how does one deal with that?
Right, so I know there are lots of writers who will continue to revise their work even if after it's been published in a book.
Yeah.
What is the underlying motivation to do that?
Um. Again, okay. Forgive me for mentioning Leonard Cohen again, but he had songs that he would put out in the studio album, and then as a performer, I think it's a much easier, and he would go on to the stage and perform those songs live, and he would just always mess up the lyrics a little bit. Not mess up in the sense he would make a mistake, but he would change up the lyrics. A line that say, uh, "If I have been untrue, um, I hope you know that it was never to you," will become, "If I have been untrue, it's just that I thought a lover had to be some kind of liar too." So that second line I actually much prefer, and it is in the live versions that he would say that, whereas in the studio versions he published that earlier line, which is a much lesser line, even as it is great. And I think that kind of dissatisfaction too, it's it's part of an. I mean, it's certainly part of me that as artists we're always trying to say the unsayable, and we know that the unsayable cannot be said. It's in the line itself. It's unsayable. It cannot be said, but we're still trying. We're still striving for that kind of perfection, so to speak. And even though we know we'll never reach it, it's noble and fun to try.
Um, in the chat, someone says a poem is only finished when the poet passes away, and I think very astute. In with painting, there is a way where you can overwork a painting and kind of ruin it.
Right.
Do you think that's possible with a poem?
Absolutely. I think I've ruined many of my poems by overworking them. For sure, that's possible. I think there is grace in knowing, it's time to let this go. I don't have to be a perfectionist. There's an ego at play when you kind of want to overdo and overdo. It's disgusting. I am ashamed of myself for doing that.
There's um, so the maybe reverse of that. Do you have any advice against publishing first drafts, like publishing them because they're the most raw version? Do you ever do that? Do you think people should?
Like I said, I do not do that, and I would. hopefully, maybe I hope that I would someday feel comfortable doing that. But like I said, great poems and songs and great art is made on or written on napkins, sitting in a bar and never needing any revision. And sometimes a poem takes 10 years and it's still not there. So it depends on you if you feel comfortable sharing your rawest, most urgent, least revised work. Why shouldn't you be able to?
Uh, What do you think makes great poetry? We talk about good poetry, great poetry. What makes it great?
Somebody asked in that same vein, uh, in when they were asking about great poetry, that trends change or something to that effect. Can you bring that up, Sultana? Do you remember what I'm speaking of? Somebody mentioned that trends change so quickly. I just wonder if Emily Dickinson was thinking if she's writing great poetry, or if Shakespeare was really feeling that he was hitting it when he was writing one of his sonnets, or if I don't know. You don't decide. You don't decide um, what is great and what is not great. And I'm actually glad. I will not have it any other way. It's the culture that decides if you're fulfilling its appetites years and years later. You don't, you have no say in it, and it shouldn't be your concern. You should write an honest poem, a poem that speaks your truth. Whether greatness follows it or not is greatness's choice.
Um, what do you think makes a poem or a poet stand out? What is the most unique thing about someone's work? And is that what literary journals look for when they decide what to publish?
I think so. I think if we are all looking for a voice we have not heard before. Uh, why I love my daughter is because she is my daughter and not another person. She is exactly who she is and exactly who I love. If she were a little different, maybe things would be different. Or I don't know, I'm pretty sure I still love her, but then I would be loving that particular person and not this particular person who she is right now. And that sense of the particular is so important because all we see is copies of copies of copies of copies of copies. All we see is people trying to be like somebody else. And there is honor in that, and there is logic in that. Why we try to imitate others we love and admire. I mean, if I could be even this much like Leonard Cohen, I'd give half my arm for that. So I'm not arguing against that. But the sense of the particular, that in this world where we are consumers and treated as consumers, and we are nothing but people who things can be sold to, it is an act of rebellion to be yourself and to refuse. And yeah, I don't know if I make sense, but I make more
Yeah.
sense in my own head.
No, of course it does. There's this part in us that wants to conform, right? To be part of our world. Um, but in order to keep your uniqueness about you, you can't fully conform. So
Yes.
there's this tension between those two opposing forces for every writer. What's one piece of writing advice that you always ignore, or a writing rule
Sorry.
that you used to follow that you abandon?
uh, I'm not over what you said, because that is so true. um yeah, to be an individual in a world that is always telling you to not be an individual is truly, um the best you can do. Yeah, it sounds so corny when I say it like that, but it's true. I mean, you're always being told to not to confirm. Uh, it's kind of cool that you mentioned that. Sorry, Susanna, I just got lost. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I think about that all the time, as I write, because if you go off the rails, right, then you're just like ranting under a bridge, except we want that. We want that rawness, right? So,
Right.
yeah,
Yeah. I mean, not holding a cup as perhaps a writer or a glass of wine is supposed to, but holding my daughter's bottle because that was the nearest thing is probably, again, a subconscious act of not wanting to confirm. And I think most artists are driven by that impulse of, of, of not belonging, of feeling an alien everywhere or wanting to be an alien.
yeah. And I certainly, that was not meant to be like a disparaging comment about ranting under a bridge. My husband actually says that my bridge rants are his favorite poems, so that was actually, I tried
Okay.
to tap into that. Um, so the writing advice that you like to ignore or that you used to follow that you no longer follow, does anything stand out that you think is just garbage advice that is maybe popular, or commonly touted to be true?
Yes, because only because this is so popular, people keep saying show don't tell. That's probably the
Mm,
gospel when you become a writer. You go through all your MFA students, your cohort says it, your teachers say it, your friends say it, all the advice columns say it, and of course, since people say it so often, there is value in that. But I'm kind of tired of being shown all the time. I think it's fine if you want to tell. And that's an easy answer. That's a cop out answer. Uh, I don't know the real answer. I have not ever been good at either following or ignoring advice. I've never been preoccupied by the idea of advice, though I love it in interviews. I love reading what advice people want to give or what advice they've received. I think there is some great stuff out there. We always ask our poets and our writers now via Strange Pilgrims and Only Poems, what is some advice you have received or would like to give? I think there is a time for everything, and I know there are young kids in New Delhi or Nigeria or I don't know Texas who want to who want some advice, and I might end up saying something, or somebody might end up saying something that changes somebody's lives. Um, so I'm not um, I'm neither egotistical enough to think that I can do that, nor egotistical enough to ignore the possibility of that. It can happen. It cannot happen.
what are your thoughts on using tropes or cliches?
Again, depends on why you use them. They can be pretty useful, pretty funny, but if you use them unknowingly, they're usually terrible and poor and reflects poorly upon your skill and your yeah. Or even if you know that you know you're doing it, but it does not come across, it still reflects poorly.
What about when you use a cliche or a trope, but then subvert the expectation? Is that
Yeah,
okay?
that's kind of what I meant. But it, I mean, we all know that. We all know that we are supposed to subvert cliches. So is subverting cliche now a cliche? So
Mhm.
it's tricky. You know,
Yeah.
it really depends on the particular.
Um, what about works in translation? Can you talk a little bit about either publishing or where or how to go about publishing works in translation, or even things like blackout poetry or centos?
Okay,
It's not
okay,
necessarily just your own work, right? Um,
I see, I see. So let's begin with translations because I am a um, translated lit aficionado or fan. I love reading poetry in translation. I love reading just novels in translation. I wish I knew why. I've always been attracted to cultures that were not my own, and also that were not American. Um, Translators do some of the most noble work. It's so unacknowledged or under-acknowledged. I think now it's getting a little better, but it has been for a long time very under-acknowledged. So work in translation, we make a point of doing a translated poem once a week at Only Poems Daily for the same reason, because there is so much literature out there that wasn't written in English. Why would you um, deprive yourself of that? I mean, I know I would not like to. I know that reading Alejandra Pizarnik changed the way my brain works, and Kim Hai-soon, Ase Berg. These are some of my favorite poets, and I would never have been able to get familiar with any of these women's minds if it weren't for translated translators. I mean, my favorite book of all time is 100 Years of Solitude and Garcia Marquez, Love in the Time of Cholera. Those two books rule my imagination. And oh God, I don't even want to think of a world where I did not know Garcia Marquez. So it's since we in on our for our magazine and the way our website works, we only can make one author for per week who is our featured poet of the week. Recently, somebody whose work I admired, she sent us some poems. This writer, and those poems were actually somebody else's poems, and she translated them. And it took a while to figure out how we're gonna run those poems, but we did figure it out, and we are in a couple months we're gonna run those poems, poems that were written by a German woman and translated by somebody else, and we're gonna interview. It's gonna be our first interview through a translator, and we're still figuring out how to correctly credit them both. And yeah, because and she said something so nice and something so graceful, that's I know that you are coming from a place of um, curiosity and good faith, and uh, it's the work that matters. It doesn't even matter as much if I get the highlighted credit. Just mention my name somewhere and it should be fine. And I was like, that's exactly how I would go about it too. So it was very touching. As for centos, I mean, I think there's a way when people borrow lines and credit, like just mention it. This line is from that poet, and there's many ways to credit um, poets whose work you borrow or writers whose work you borrow. We see it all the time. We see it happen all the time now. As for blackout poetry, I think it's more interesting. It's very it's kind of terrible if you black out a poem that is already a poem. Like if you make blackout poetry out of existing poetry, whereas if you make blackout poetry from the ad that Kanye West just bought in the Wall Street Journal, I think if you were to do a blackout poem from that, that'll be kind of cool. I think blackout poetry is usually, or I think it came into existence as a tool of resistance when people would take up governmental announcements and they would mess those up. And that's a lot of fun. I know that there's a woman on Instagram who does it with hate messages or something, and some of that is pretty cool.
Yeah, I think there's something almost spiritual or, what's the word? Where, alchemical, right? Where
Yeah.
you're using erasure to reclaim some power, depending
Yes.
on the source document that you're working with.
Right. That is the yeah. When the source, if you choose a source document correctly, you can have a lot of fun with blackout poetry.
There's just one question in the chat, and then, we'll probably end on this one. Going back to translation, if one of your characters has a second language, that they speak or multiple languages, how does it work out when you translate into those languages? Should you avoid translation, um, in, say, a work of fiction, although it can be poetry? If my character speaks Farsi, should I use English or Farsi script?
As a political choice, I would not use it because I would say that even as I'm writing in English to a largely English audience, English speaking audience, my political choice would be to leave it untranslated because I'm like, you can Google,
Right.
you know. I think we live in a pretty accessible world where it's pretty easy to know what is being written. I mean, I've read books where I haven't understood things and I've had to work for it. So we as people, colonized people, should have the the same kind of. I want to be dirty and I don't want to use bad language, so I'm just gonna stop. But yes, do not. I mean, it's your choice, really, why you want to do it or why you don't want to do it. But I know that I will not translate for anybody.
Yeah. There's one more question that I don't want to leave hanging and
I'm
just
happy to answer.
um,
I don't want to. I don't want anybody to feel that they were not looked at.
what are your thoughts on poetry in fiction when it has a connection to the world building?
I'm not sure I understand.
So let's say you're reading a novel and there's poetry in the novel. I think this is maybe becoming more common with like blurred genre and hybrid work.
Yeah, yeah, and I think a lot of poets now write novels because people want to make money, I guess. But what is there to think about? I think if it makes sense within the world of your book that a character is writing a poem or that the narrator is somehow for some reason reading a poem, bringing out a poem, why not? I mean, poetry is a part of life, and if fiction is to reflect life, then poetry can easily be a part of it.
Yeah.
But I've seen it done really sloppily, so I don't know.
Yeah, it should be integrated in some way that
Seamless,
that
yeah, yeah.
yeah,
It's all about skill, really. I mean, so many of these answers can be just, yeah, why not? I mean, if you can do it well, you can do it, and you can ruin the easiest of things, and you can accomplish the most difficult of things pretty seamlessly.
yeah. And people write entire novels in verse. So, um, thank you. This has been
Yes.
such an enlightening conversation, and yeah, it's always really interesting to talk about how the world of poetry is how it matters for people in different ways. So thank you, Karan, and thank you everyone at home for joining us. And we'll see you on the next one.
Thank you, Svetlana. I'm still surprised over 260 people were here for this. I hope somebody got
Super,
something out of it.
super, super
Cheers,
grateful
Svetlana.
for everyone participating. Bye.
See you soon.